Paul Wilson awoke from cryosleep to alarms blaring across his cramped probe cockpit. The scanners had detected strange energy readings from an uncharted planet he was nowhere near ready to face alone. Panic threatened to set in as he pored over the scans. The readings were unlike anything on record, hinting at technology far beyond anything humans had encountered. Landing solo to investigate the anomaly broke every protocol in the book, but the potential discovery was too momentous to ignore. This was what he trained for. As his lander pierced the atmosphere, vibrant alien jungle sprawled below, a dizzying canopy sheltering a thriving ecosystem. Colorful, feathered creatures soared on powerful wings, their avian forms somehow both familiar and utterly foreign. Paul gaped in wonder, realizing he was glimpsing a never-before-seen sentient civilization, one whose entire existence would be upended by his arrival. The instant his craft touched down, a squadron of towering soldiers encircled him, each one astride a saurian mount bristling with iridescent plumage. The warriors themselves stood over 7 feet tall, humanoid in shape, but sheathed head to toe in resplendent feathers of every hue. He was face to face with the formidable Pakled race. Their leader, an imposing specimen named Belos, bellowed for the intruder's immediate surrender. Paul raised his empty hands in a gesture of peace and attempted to communicate through his translation module. The Pakled commander recoiled, as if the innocuous greeting were a grievous insult. To Belos, Paul's conciliatory tone could only be a ruse or a show of weakness. In a heartbeat, 100 razor-sharp blades were leveled at the human's throat. At that instant, a groundquake shook the jungle to its roots, toppling trees and sending the Pakled's mounts into a frenzy. The tremors dislodged great swathes of vegetation to reveal cyclopean blocks of stone, their pitted surfaces inscribed with inscrutable hieroglyphs. Colossal statues and obelisks thrust skyward from the rubble of their ancient foundations, the remnants of a sprawling city that predated the Pakleds by millennia. Paul and the Pakleds reeled at the cataclysmic change in the landscape. The structures were clearly not of Pakled design, speaking of an industrial scale and technological sophistication far surpassing their relatively primitive culture. Yet Belos's shock soon turned to outrage. He jabbed an accusatory finger at Paul, decrying the human's presence as a defilement that had awakened the lost capital of the Pakled's revered ancestors. As the commander barked orders for his capture, Paul sprang into action. He triggered his exosuit's defensive shield an instant before the Pakleds opened fire. Plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the shimmering barrier. Before the warriors could regroup for another salvo, Paul swept them back with a concentrated blast from his sidearm, dialed down to avoid lethal force. Seizing his chance, the explorer sprinted into the labyrinthine ruins where the Pakleds couldn't easily pursue. Safely concealed in the primordial structures, Paul set to work unraveling their mysteries. The weathered friezes and eroded glyphs painted a fragmented portrait of the aliens who built this once great city. It soon became apparent that this was no mere settlement, but a spaceport, one constructed by an advanced race that had mastered the stars untold eons before humans or Pakleds first turned their eyes to the heavens. As he spelunked deeper, Paul uncovered signs of a cataclysm that had brought the nameless precursors low. Scorch marks and debris patterns hinted at an orbital bombardment of unthinkable proportions. He couldn't help but wonder if the aggressors had been interlopers like himself, or if the builders' own hubris had spelled their doom. In either case, only scattered traces remained of the fantastical technologies they had once wielded. If any scraps of that legendary power still lay hidden in some unspoiled vault, the repercussions for the primitive Pakleds would be beyond reckoning. Belos, meanwhile, had far more immediate concerns. Word of the human interloper spread like wildfire, and the commander faced a dual crisis of defending Pakled sovereignty while safeguarding treasured holy sites. The ancient city was the stuff of myth, but its abrupt unveiling had sent shockwaves through the pious Pakled psyche. Already the high priests were clamoring for access, demanding to commune with the ancestral spirits. Belos swiftly dispatched a cohort of scouts to the capital, entreating the emperor to dispatch every available legion to lock down the ruins. Reinforcements began descending on the ruins within the hour. Dropships disgorged hundreds of Pakled infantry and mechanized warriors, the thunder of their engines sending the jungle's fauna scattering in all directions. As the troops established a perimeter, their engineers delved into the newly risen structures, intent on plundering any scraps of forgotten knowledge for the glory of their race. Ancient capacitors crackled to life, having long dreamed of the day they might again unleash forces beyond imagining. Amid the build-up and the frenzied explorations, one fact was inescapably clear. The arrival of a single human from beyond the stars had already unalterably transformed Pakled civilization. As the first emissary to an ignorant people, every action Paul took from here on out would shape the future of a whole world. The decisions he made, the knowledge he shared or withheld, the alliances he struck or spurned, the fate of the Pakleds now rested in his hands. For better or worse, there could be no return to the simple existence they had known before the coming of Paul Wilson. Paul pressed deeper into the alien complex, his footsteps echoing through cavernous halls. He ran his hand along smooth metal walls, marveling at their flawless construction. The air hummed with latent energy. As he rounded a corner, Paul's jaw dropped. Before him stretched a vast chamber filled with technology beyond his wildest dreams. Sleek consoles lined the walls, their surfaces alive with dancing lights. In the center, a pillar of shimmering energy stretched from floor to ceiling. Taking a deep breath, Paul pressed a glowing panel. The room came alive. Holographic displays sprang into existence, filling the air with swirling images. A voice spoke, calm and androgynous. "Welcome, sentient being. I am the caretaker AI of this facility. How may I assist you?" Paul's mind reeled. Who built this place? What happened to them? The AI's tone turned somber. This facility was constructed by the progenitors, an ancient race that seeded life across the galaxy. Allow me to show you their history. The holograms shifted, depicting the rise and fall of a mighty civilization. Paul watched, transfixed, as the AI recounted the progenitors' achievements and ultimate downfall. Indeed, the Pakleds were one of many experiments in guided evolution. However, a schism arose among the progenitors. Some wished to accelerate the development of their creations, while others counseled patience. This disagreement led to civil war and the fall of progenitor civilization. Paul's gaze fell upon a nearby device, its purpose unclear, but its power evident. What does this do? That is an evolutionary accelerator, the AI explained. It can rapidly advance a species' biological and technological development. Many such devices exist throughout this complex. Paul's blood ran cold as he grasped the implications. In the wrong hands, this technology could wreak havoc across the galaxy. Before he could respond, alarms blared. The AI's voice took on an urgent tone. "Warning, hostile forces detected. Activating defense systems." Paul raced to a view screen, his heart pounding. Outside, Belos and his Pakled army had arrived in force. As they approached the ruins, weapon emplacements rose from the ground, taking aim. He frantically worked the console, trying to override the defenses. Sweat beaded on his brow as he raced against time. With seconds to spare, he found the right command. The weapons powered down, retreating into their hidden bunkers. Paul slumped against the console, relief washing over him. But the reprieve was short-lived. More Pakled ships appeared in the sky, disgorging reinforcements. Belos's voice boomed through an amplification system. "Human, surrender and turn over the ancestral technology. We will not be denied our birthright." Paul's mind raced. He couldn't let the Pakleds have this power, but he was grossly outnumbered. What could he do? As if in answer, a nearby door slid open with a hiss. Paul cautiously approached, finding himself in a vast hangar. At its center sat a sleek spacecraft of obvious progenitor design. The ship's systems sprang to life as Paul drew near. A soft blue glow emanated from its hull, and a ramp extended in invitation. Paul stood frozen, torn by indecision. He could take the ship and flee, safeguarding the progenitor's legacy. But could he abandon the Pakleds to their fate? Perhaps there was a way to use this technology to guide them toward a brighter future. Outside, Belos rallied his troops for an all-out assault on the complex. Time was running out. Paul had to choose, and choose quickly. The fate of the Pakleds, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. Paul's heart raced as he heard the thunderous approach of Belos and his forces. He knew he had only moments to act. With a deep breath, he sprinted towards the sleek progenitor spacecraft. The ship's systems sprang to life as Paul approached. He vaulted into the cockpit, his hands flying over unfamiliar controls. A calm voice spoke. "Welcome, pilot. I am this vessel's artificial intelligence. How may I assist you?" "Get us out of here!" Paul shouted. The AI responded instantly. Displays flickered to life, showing schematics and readouts Paul could barely comprehend. "Initiating launch sequence. Please designate a call sign for communication purposes." Paul's mind raced. Prometheus, call yourself Prometheus." Just then the hangar doors exploded inward. Belos stormed through the smoke, plasma rifle raised. "Human, surrender now!" Paul slammed his hand down on what he hoped was the ignition. The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground. Plasma bolts splashed against its hull as Pakled warriors poured into the hangar. "Do it!" Paul yelled. The ship shot forward, blasting out of the ruins and into the sky. Paul caught a glimpse of Belos's enraged face as they rocketed past. Pakled ships gave chase, but their weapons were no match for the progenitor vessel's defenses. Within moments they broke atmosphere. Paul slumped in his seat, adrenaline still coursing through him. That was close. Paul ran a hand through his hair. "Anywhere but here. We need to get far away while I figure out what to do next." "Understood. This vessel is equipped with a highly advanced, faster-than-light drive. We can cover vast distances in short periods." As they cruised through the star system, leaving the Pakled world behind, Prometheus began sharing information about the ship's capabilities and the progenitors who built it. Paul listened, fascinated, as he learned of a galaxy-spanning civilization that had seeded life on countless worlds. "Wait," Paul interrupted. "Are you saying the progenitors created humans too?" "That is correct. The progenitors established outposts and technology caches on many worlds as a safeguard against their own potential extinction." Before Paul could process this revelation, an alert chimed. Prometheus announced, "I've detected a faint signal matching progenitor frequencies. It originates from a nearby star system." "Certainly. Plotting course now." The ship surged forward, stars blurring around them. In what felt like mere minutes, they approached a desolate, rocky planet. As they descended, Paul saw the unmistakable remains of artificial structures. They touched down near a half-buried complex. Paul donned an environment suit and stepped out onto the barren world. Wind-scoured ruins stretched into the distance. Inside the outpost, some systems still functioned, their displays casting an eerie glow. Paul explored cautiously, Prometheus guiding him through his suit's comm. In a lower chamber, Paul found a sealed door. It hissed open at his approach, revealing a room dominated by a large, coffin-like pod. As Paul drew near, the pod's surface turned transparent. Inside lay a being unlike any Paul had ever seen. Clearly not human, but sharing a vaguely similar form. The pod's systems hummed to life. The being's eyes snapped open. Paul stumbled back as the pod opened. The alien sat up slowly, its movements stiff. It fixed Paul with an unblinking gaze and spoke in a voice that seemed to bypass Paul's ears and resonate directly in his mind. "At last, a worthy one has come." The being inclined its head. "I am Zelos, scientist of the progenitors. The time of awakening is upon us." Paul and Zelos wasted no time. They input the ancient star charts into Prometheus's navigation system and set a course for the progenitor homeworld. As they journeyed through uncharted space, Paul's eyes widened at the sights before him. Swirling cosmic anomalies painted the void in impossible colors. The twisted husks of long-dead civilizations drifted by, silent monuments to forgotten empires. "Look out!" Zelos suddenly shouted. A gaping maw of absolute darkness loomed ahead. A rogue black hole. Paul's hands flew over the controls as Prometheus calculated escape vectors. They skimmed the event horizon, the ship groaning as space-time warped around them. With a final burst from the engines, they broke free, the deadly singularity receding behind them. As they caught their breath, proximity alarms blared. An unusual energy signature pulsed from a nearby nebula. Tendrils of cosmic gas parted as they approached, revealing an enormous vessel adrift in the stellar fog. Zelos pressed his face to the view screen. By the Founders, it's the Harbinger. A dreadnought from the final days of our civil war, Zelos explained. We must board it. If any vessel holds clues to the Omega Protocol's location, it's this one. They docked with the derelict ship, Zelos leading the way through dark corridors. Paul yelped as a decrepit security drone lurched at him from the shadows. Zelos blasted it with an energy pulse from his gauntlet. Stay alert, the progenitor warned. Even after eons, this ship's defenses may still pose a threat. They fought their way to the bridge, Paul's heart pounding as they disabled ancient trap after ancient trap. Finally, they reached the central computer core. Zelos interfaced with the system, his eyes glowing as he processed the data. Remarkable, he murmured. The ship's AI has preserved itself all this time. A holographic figure flickered to life before them. Humanoid, but clearly artificial. Its voice crackled with static. Identify yourselves, intruders. Zelos stepped forward. I am Zelos, scientist of the progenitors. This human is Paul Wilson. We seek information about the Omega Protocol. The AI's form stabilized slightly. Access denied. Systems failing. Required to assistance. We can help, Paul offered. But we need that information. It's vital. Acceptable, the AI replied. Restore functionality and data will be shared. Paul and Zelos worked feverishly, linking Prometheus to the Harbinger's systems. As power flowed into the ancient computers, the AI's form solidified. I am the tactical database of the Harbinger, it announced. Our final mission was to reach and activate the Omega Protocol before it could fall into enemy hands. We failed. The AI's projection showed the Harbinger under attack, crippled by enemy fire. With power failing, I initiated emergency protocols to preserve my databanks. Eons passed as I waited for rescue. After interfacing with Prometheus, the AI reconstructed coordinates for the progenitor homeworld, but its tone turned grave. Be warned. The defenses surrounding that world are like nothing you've ever encountered. Zelos turned to Paul, his expression grim. To reach our goal, we may need to reactivate this ship's weapons. Galaxy-spanning plasma lances, chronoton torpedoes that can rend space-time itself. As they prepared the Harbinger for departure, the scene shifted to the Pakled homeworld. In a secret lab, Belos watched as his scientists prodded at salvaged progenitor tech. A holodisplay showed schematics for impossibly advanced weaponry. With this, a scientist gushed, we could conquer our entire sector. Belos frowned, uneasy. Before he could respond, alarms blared. He raced to another lab, bursting through the doors to find a group of militants clustered around a pulsing orb of energy. Stop, Belos roared. That's a reality disruption bomb. It could shatter our entire world. The militants scattered as security forces flooded in. As the device was secured, Belos stared at it, his mind racing. This power was too great, too terrible. It had to be contained, or destroyed, before it destroyed them all. He strode to the command center, barking orders. Prepare our fastest ships. We're going hunting for that human and for the source of all this. Back aboard the Harbinger, Paul and Zelos guided the massive vessel out of the nebula. A field of twisted space lay before them, artificial singularities and gravitic mines guarding the path to the progenitor homeworld. Last chance to back out, Paul said, his hands hovering over the weapons controls. Zelos shook his head. We must reach the Omega Protocol before anyone else does. The fate of humanity and all alien species hangs in the balance. With a deep breath, Paul fired up the ancient engines. The Harbinger surged forward, plunging into the deadly maze of cosmic traps that guarded the progenitor's final secrets. The Harbinger plunged into the deadly maze of cosmic traps, its ancient engines roaring to life. Paul's hands flew over the controls, his eyes darting between readouts as he navigated the treacherous path. Beside him, Zalos stood at the weapons console, his alien fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "Spatial distortion ahead," Paul called out, yanking the ship hard to port. The view screen filled with a writhing mass of twisted spacetime. Zalos responded without hesitation, firing plasma lances. Brilliant beams of energy lanced out from the Harbinger, slicing through the anomaly. The distortion collapsed in on itself, leaving a clear path forward. Paul exhaled sharply. "Nice shot." "Gravitic mines detected," the ship's AI warned. "Impact imminent." "Chroniton torpedoes, full spread," Zalos ordered. A swarm of projectiles erupted from the Harbinger's weapons bays. They detonated in staggered bursts, each explosion rippling through subspace. The mines blinked out of existence, neutralized by the temporal shockwaves. As they pressed on, a yawning void appeared before them, an artificial black hole, its event horizon a shimmering barrier of absolute darkness. "Pull up!" Zalos shouted. Paul wrenched the controls, sending the massive dreadnought into a stomach-churning climb. They skimmed the black hole's edge, alarms blaring as the gravity well threatened to pull them in. Zelos's voice was tight with concentration, charging main cannon. The deck plates thrummed as power surged through the ancient weapon. A lance of pure energy erupted from the Harbinger's prow, striking the heart of the singularity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a silent flash that seared their retinas, the black hole collapsed. Paul sagged in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. That was too close. Before Zalos could respond, new alerts flashed across the displays. A swarm of energy signatures approached rapidly from their stern. The pursuing armada filled the rear view screens, dozens of vessels arrayed in attack formation. At their center, a massive command ship bristled with weaponry. Aboard that vessel, Bellos stared in awe at the readings flooding his screens. "Impossible," he breathed. "That's a progenitor dreadnought." His science officer nodded grimly. "Its power output is off the charts. Our entire fleet couldn't match a fraction of its capabilities." Belos's mind raced. They couldn't let such a weapon fall into enemy hands or worse, be used against them. He made his decision. "All ships, focus fire on a single point," he ordered. "We have to cripple it before it can bring those planet killers to bear." The pack-led fleet opened fire, a torrent of energy washing over the Harbinger's shields. Paul cursed as the ship shuddered under the assault. "Evasive maneuvers!" Zalos barked. Paul sent the dreadnought into a series of wild spins and rolls, narrowly avoiding the brunt of the pack-led barrage. A stray blast struck home, overloading a power conduit. New alarms blared. The ship's AI spoke urgently. "Warning, warp core containment failing, breach imminent." Zalos's eyes widened. "We'll never make it to the coordinates like this." He hesitated for a split second, then nodded to himself. "Initiating emergency wormhole jump." "What?" Paul yelped. "Is that even possible?" "It's experimental," Zalos admitted, already inputting commands. "But it's our only chance." The Harbinger's engines screamed as reality itself seemed to twist around them. A swirling vortex of energy opened before the ship, crackling with eldritch power. They plunged into the artificial singularity, the very fabric of space-time tearing at the ancient vessel's hull. Paul's vision swam as impossible colors assaulted his senses. It felt like his atoms were being pulled apart and reassembled with each passing nanosecond. Just when he thought he couldn't take any more, it ended. The Harbinger burst back into normal space, systems sputtering and alarms still blaring. Through the clearing haze of the view screen, an unassuming planet hung before them. As the battered dreadnought's sensors swept the construct, Paul's jaw dropped. The readouts showed millions upon millions of weapon platforms and defense satellites encircling the entire world, all dormant but ready to spring to genocidal life at a moment's notice. Zalos nodded grimly. "Agreed. We'll have to proceed with utmost caution. The control nexus for the Omega Protocol is our target, buried deep beneath the northern polar region. They maneuvered the crippled Harbinger into a high orbit, well outside the defense grid's sensor range. Paul and Zelos made their way to a small stealth shuttle in one of the Dreadnought's cavernous hangars. As the shuttle detached and began its stealthy descent, Paul's hands shook slightly on the controls. They wove through the lethal web of ancient sentinels, each one capable of obliterating entire star systems. At last, they touched down on Primordium's barren surface. Suited up in environment gear, they approached a massive doorway set into the icy ground. Paul's breath caught in his throat as he saw fresh tool marks scarring the entrance. "Someone's beaten us here," he said, voice tight with apprehension. Zelos nodded, drawing a sleek energy weapon. "Be ready for anything." Paul and Zelos crept through the dimly lit tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As they descended deeper into the facility, signs of recent activity became apparent. Freshly activated defense systems hummed with energy, their indicators blinking ominously. Disarmed sentry drones lay scattered across the passage, their metallic husks bearing scorch marks from recent firefights. Zelos nodded, his alien features set in a grim expression. Recently, and they knew what they were doing. They pressed on, every shadow potentially concealing a threat. As they approached the central command nexus, voices drifted from beyond a massive set of doors. Paul's heart raced as Zelos interfaced with the access panel, overriding the security protocols. The doors slid open, revealing a scene of frantic activity. A team of pack-led engineers swarmed around the Omega Protocol's control systems, frantically attempting to hack into its impenetrable defenses. At the center of the chaos stood a tall, heavily armed pack-led, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the newcomers. "Halt!" Commander Volus barked, leveling a menacing energy weapon at Paul and Zelos. "Hands where I can see them!" Paul froze, slowly raising his arms. Zelos remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Volus sneered. "So the infamous human and his progenitor pet. You're too late, we've already cracked your precious Omega Protocol." "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Zelos warned, his voice steady despite the weapon trained on him. "Oh, I think we do," Volus retorted. "Now surrender the abort codes, we know you have them." Before Zelos could respond, a familiar voice crackled through Volus's comm device. "Commander Volus, report!" Paul's blood ran cold. It was Belos. "My lord," Volus responded, his eyes never leaving his prisoners. "We've secured the Nexus. The human and the progenitor are here." "Excellent," Belos's voice held a note of triumph. "My fleet has entered the system. We tracked the Harbinger's wormhole trajectory. Hold that facility at all costs. The Omega Protocol must not be activated." As Belos's transmission cut out, the sound of pounding footsteps echoed from the corridor. Pack-led reinforcements poured into the chamber, surrounding Paul and Zelos. In that moment of chaos, Zelos leaned close to Paul, his voice barely audible. "I can't access the protocol directly, but I can trigger an overload. It's our only chance." "It will activate Primordium's defenses," Zelos continued urgently. "Self-replicating nanoswarms von Neumann probes. Weapons that could convert entire planets into armadas, but it's the only way to keep it out of their hands." Paul swallowed hard, his mind racing. Before he could formulate a response, Volus advanced, his weapon inches from Zelos's face. Zelos met the pack-led's gaze. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you have this power." In a blur of motion, Zelos slammed his palm onto a nearby control panel. Alarms blared as the facility's systems surged into overdrive. "No!" Volus roared, opening fire. Paul ducked, tackling the nearest pack-led soldier. He grappled for the alien's weapon as chaos erupted around him. Energy blasts scorched the walls as pack-led troops tried to subdue Zelos and regain control of the system. Through the din of battle, Paul heard a low, ominous hum building beneath their feet. The Omega Protocol was awakening, and with it, the full might of Primordium's apocalyptic arsenal. As Paul fought his way through the pack-led forces, He caught glimpses of the facility's external feeds. Massive orbital structures were coming to life, their hulls opening to reveal swarms of microscopic terrors poised to cleanse the galaxy of all non-progenitor life. A plan formed in Paul's mind, a daring plan. He fought his way to Zelos's side, shouting over the din of battle and sirens, "The Harbinger's warp core, we can use it to disperse the energy." Zelos's eyes widened in understanding. He nodded, covering Paul as they fought their way back toward the entrance. "Go!" Zelos shouted. "Get the quantum node from the shuttle. I'll hold them here." Paul hesitated for a split second, then turned and sprinted down the corridor. Behind him he heard the sounds of renewed fighting as Zelos engaged the Pakled forces. The shuttle lay where they had left it, a beacon of hope in the midst of catastrophe. Paul's hands flew over the controls, extracting the crucial quantum node. As he worked, the ground shook beneath his feet. Through the view screen, he saw Belos ships engaging the awakening defenses of Primordium, energy weapons flashing futilely against the ancient megastructures. Node in hand, Paul raced back into the facility. He found Zelos holding the line against a relentless Pakled assault, the air thick with energy discharges and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry. Without a word, Paul dove into the fray, fighting his way to the central nexus. His fingers flew across the alien controls, integrating the Harbinger's quantum node into the pulsing heart of the Omega Protocol. "Now, Paul!" Zelos shouted, his voice strained as he held back the tide of Pakled soldiers. Paul activated the node, praying his desperate plan would work. A shimmering aperture sprang to life, tendrils of distorted space-time reaching out to embrace the cascading energies of the Omega Protocol. For a moment it seemed to be working. The facility's alarms quieted, the pulsing energies of the protocol bleeding off into the safety of subspace, but then a final surge of power ripped through the system. Paul was thrown back as the shuttle's containment fields faltered. A swarm of silvery particles erupted from the nexus, coalescing into a terrifying cloud of nanites. "Zelos!" Paul cried out in horror as the swarm surged toward his friend. The ancient progenitor turned, his eyes meeting Paul's for one final moment, before the nanites engulfed him. Paul watched in helpless terror as Zelos's form blurred and shifted, consumed by the rampant technology. Alarms blared anew as Belos's reinforcements breached the outer defenses. With no time to mourn and the immediate threat contained, Paul staggered to his feet. He cast one last glance at the spot where Zelos had stood, then turned and ran for the shuttle. As Paul's craft lifted off from the surface of Primordium, he saw Pakled dropships descending on the shattered Nexus facility. The fate of his friend uncertain, the Omega Protocol neutralized, but at a terrible cost. Paul pushed the shuttle to its limits, fleeing the... Paul's hands shook as he guided the shuttle away from Primordium's surface. The silvery swarm of nanites that had engulfed Zelos still burned in his mind's eye. He forced himself to focus on the task at hand, pushing the craft to its limits as he raced back to the Harbinger. The dreadnought loomed before him, its ancient hull scarred but still intact. Paul docked with practiced precision, sprinting through the corridors to the bridge. As he slid into the command chair, proximity alarms blared. "Pakled vessels entering the system," the ship's AI announced. Paul's fingers flew across the controls, bringing the Harbinger's systems online. The view screen lit up with a terrifying sight, Belos' flagship leading a swarm of destroyers, weapons already charging. The Harbinger lurched into motion just as the first salvo of energy beams lanced through space. Paul weaved through the barrage, feeling the ship shudder as glancing blows struck its shields. With no time for finesse, Paul activated the experimental wormhole drive. Reality twisted around the Harbinger, stars blurring into streaks of light. The familiar gut-wrenching sensation of a jump enveloped him as they plunged into the artificial singularity. Seconds stretched into eternity before they burst back into normal space. Paul gasped for breath, his vision swimming with impossible colors. As the disorientation faded, he found himself staring at an unfamiliar starfield, a distant nebula painting the void in swirls of purple and green. "We made it," he breathed, allowing himself a moment of relief. The reprieve was short-lived. Space warped behind the Harbinger as Belos's ships tore through the fabric of reality in pursuit. He had no time to ponder the impossibility. The pack-led fleet opened fire, their weapons no longer held in check by the ancient defenses of Primordium. Paul's fingers danced across the Harbinger's weapons controls, deploying swarms of hunter-seekers. The automated drones streaked towards the pack-led ships, their energy signatures barely registering against the vastness of space. They slammed into their targets with pinpoint precision, detonating in brilliant flashes that crippled engines and weapon systems. Paul didn't wait to see the results. He triggered the Harbinger's spinal lances, channeling the full might of the Dreadnought's power core into searing beams of destructive energy. The weapons tore through pack-led hulls seamlessly, leaving nothing but scattered debris in their wake. But still Belos came on, his remaining ships pressing the attack with suicidal purpose. Paul could almost feel the pack-led leader's rage radiating across the battlefield. "We have lost Belos," Paul shouted, though he knew his words couldn't reach his enemy. "Stand down!" The only answer was another barrage of weapons fire. Paul gritted his teeth, preparing to deliver the final blow. His finger hovered over the trigger. Suddenly the space around them began to warp and twist. Paul's eyes widened as he realized the distortions weren't coming from any of the ships. They emanated from a single point, rapidly expanding outward. "Oh no," he whispered, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "Zelos, what have we done?" The subspace wormholes they had used to shunt away the Omega Protocol's energies were destabilizing, merging into a monstrous, all-consuming singularity. Paul watched in horror as the gravity well intensified, dragging both the Harbinger and the remaining pack-led ships inexorably towards its event horizon. Time itself seemed to warp and stretch as they neared the singularity's edge. Hawking radiation flared in brilliant, deadly bursts, with each new wormhole torn open by the collapsing subspace network. Paul's mind raced. There had to be a way out, some solution hidden in the vast knowledge of the progenitors. His eyes fell on the wormhole drive's control node, and a desperate plan formed. With trembling hands, he ejected the node, modulating its frequencies to match the singularity's quantum signature. The swirling vortex of destruction focused on the node like a starving predator, pulling it in with inexorable force. At the last possible moment, Paul reversed the field geometries. The singularity's very existence began to converge, compressing into an infinitesimally small point of unimaginable density. A blinding flash erupted as the paradox tenacitied itself, the singularity collapsing in on itself with explosive force. The resulting shockwave scattered what remained of the pack-led fleet and slammed into the Harbinger with devastating power. Alarms blared as systems failed across the ancient vessel. Paul fought to keep the ship stable, but it was a losing battle. As darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, he felt the Harbinger's emergency protocols engage. The last thing Paul saw before losing consciousness was the swirling nebula outside, debris from the battle drifting silently through the cosmic expanse. The nebula's swirling colors faded as Paul jolted awake, his body aching from decades spent in cryosleep. He blinked, adjusting to the dim light of the Harbinger's bridge. The ship's systems hummed to life around him, displays flickering with status reports. Paul's joints creaked as he stood, stretching muscles long unused. He shuffled to the main console, fingers dancing across familiar controls. The viewscreen lit up, revealing an unfamiliar star field. The ship's AI responded, its tone neutral. 47 standard years, 3 months and 16 days since last conscious activity, Paul. He sagged against the console, the weight of lost time pressing down on him. Nearly 5 decades adrift, warning anyone who would listen about the dangers lurking within Primordium. But how many had truly heard? Paul activated the long-range sensors, scanning nearby systems for signs of civilization. As data streamed in, he noticed a disturbing pattern. Worlds that should have been teeming with life, now registered as barren wastelands. Others pulsed with energy readings far beyond their previous technological capabilities. He zoomed in on one such world, a gas giant's moon that had barely achieved spaceflight when he'd last passed through the sector. Now, impossible structures of crystalline lattices orbited the celestial body, pulsing with otherworldly power. Paul's hand hovered over the control panel, hesitating. Nothing good could come from that place, and yet he accepted the transmission. Static crackled, then determination into a familiar voice. Paul Wilson at last. What I once was, yes, and so much more. The voice carried an unsettling echo, as if speaking from everywhere and nowhere at once. The galaxy needs you, old friend. Return to Primordium. Witness what we have wrought. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Paul staring at the empty screen. His mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore this summons. As the Harbinger's engines roared to life, Paul set a course for Primordium. Whatever awaited him there, he knew it would change the destiny of the universe once again. Light years away on the Pakled homeworld, chaos reigned. The once orderly streets of the capital were now battlegrounds. Mutated monstrosities that had once been revered leaders lumbered through the rubble, their cybernetic limbs tearing through barricades with terrifying ease. High Prelate Volus, his body now a twisted fusion of flesh and machine, addressed the cowering masses from atop a shattered monument. His voice boomed, amplified by internal speakers. "Embrace the change," and he bellowed, arms spread wide. "The prophecy is fulfilled. Our gods have returned to shepherd us into a new age of enlightenment." Scattered cheers mixed with screams of terror. In the shadows, pockets of resistance formed, those who saw the mutations as a plague rather than ascension. As the two factions clashed, neither noticed the shimmering distortion forming in the sky above. The xenomemorph had arrived, ready to pass judgment on its wayward children. Paul Wilson, oblivious to the chaos unfolding across the galaxy, pushed the Harbinger to its limits. He raced towards Primordium, unaware of the crucible that awaited him, and the unfathomable entity that his old friend had become. The Harbinger's communication array crackled to life, startling Paul from his troubled thoughts. A stream of encrypted data flooded the main console, its origin unmistakable. The holographic display flickered, resolving into the familiar form of his old friend. But Zelos looked different now, his once pristine form now marred by strange, shifting patterns that seemed to writhe beneath his skin. "Paul," Zelos's voice echoed through the bridge, tinged with urgency. "We don't have much time. The xenomorph's influence spreads faster than we ever imagined. You must return to Primordium. Only together can we end this nightmare." Paul's heart raced. "But how? I saw you consumed by the nanites. How are you even alive?" Zelos's form flickered. "There's no time to explain. Track this signal. I'll be waiting." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Paul staring at empty space. He hesitated for only a moment before setting a course, following the faint energy signature left in the wake of Zelos's message. Days later, the Harbinger dropped out of FTL near a desolate asteroid field. Paul's sensors picked up a faint energy signature emanating from the largest of the space rocks. He guided his ship towards a concealed hangar bay, its entrance barely visible among the cratered surface. As Paul stepped out of the airlock, he found himself face to face with Zelos. The progenitor's appearance was even more unsettling in person, his form seeming to shift and blur at the edges. "Old friend," Zelos said, his voice carrying an otherworldly echo, "I wish our reunion could be under better circumstances." Paul nodded, following Zelos deeper into the asteroid base. "What happened to you? What is the xenomemorph?" Zelos led him to a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and pulsing energy conduits. "The xenomemorph is our greatest mistake," he explained, gesturing to the swirling data streams. "A creation meant to shepherd life, now twisted into something that seeks to unmake reality itself." Paul watched in horror as the displays showed entire star systems being warped and reshaped by an incomprehensible force. "How do we stop it?" Zelos's eyes glowed with an eerie light. We must strike at its heart, the central control nexus on Primordium, but Primordium's defenses are impenetrable to conventional craft. He led Paul to a smaller chamber, where a sleek, angular vessel waited. Its hull seemed to absorb light, making it difficult for Paul's eyes to focus on its shape. A progenitor voidcraft, Zelos explained. Equipped with an experimental entropy drive and weapons beyond anything your people have developed, it's our only hope of breaching Primordium's defenses. Paul ran his hand along the voidcraft's hull, feeling a strange, tingling sensation. "I'll do it," he said, meeting Zelos's gaze. "Whatever it takes to end this." Zelos nodded, his form flickering once more. "Then let us begin." Hours later, Paul sat in the voidcraft's cockpit, his mind linked directly to its systems. The asteroid's hangar bay opened, revealing the star-studded void beyond. "Remember," Zelos's voice echoed in his mind, "the path to Primordium is fraught with danger. Trust in the voidcraft and in yourself." Paul took a deep breath and engaged the engines. The voidcraft shot forward, its stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. As he approached Primordium, Paul's sensors lit up with warnings. The space around the planet writhed with anomalies, micro-singularities, time dilation fields, and stranger phenomena that defied classification. Paul's hands danced across the controls, guiding the voidcraft through the maze of distorted spacetime. He corkscrewed around a collapsing singularity, its gravitational pull threatening to tear the ship apart. Alarms blared as the voidcraft emerged from the anomaly field. Primordium's orbital defenses had detected the intrusion, and Paul's tactical display lit up with incoming threats. Before Zelos could respond, a swarm of self-replicating drones filled Paul's viewscreen. The von Neumann hordes converged on the voidcraft, their nanofilament tendrils reaching out to assimilate the ship and its pilot. Paul's fingers flew across the weapons controls, unleashing volleys of disruptor beams that tore through the first wave of drones. But for every one he destroyed, 2 more took its place. "The entropy drive," Zelos's voice cut through the chaos. "Activate it now." Paul slammed his palm against the drive's activation panel. Reality seemed to twist around the voidcraft as a decaying subspace field erupted outward. The von Neumann hordes caught in its radius began to break apart, their self-replication processes disrupted by the entropic wave. For a moment, Paul allowed himself a glimmer of hope, but then new alarms sounded and his shields began to fluctuate wildly. Paul watched in horror as his shield strength plummeted. Warning lights bathed the cockpit in an ominous red glow as system after system began to fail. "I can't shake them," Paul shouted, his hands cramping as he pushed the voidcraft's maneuvering thrusters to their limits. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, Paul's sensors detected a narrow wormhole tunnel forming directly ahead. Without hesitation, he plunged the voidcraft into the swirling vortex, praying it would lead him to his target. The tunnel walls constricted around the ship as Paul raced deeper into the unknown. He could feel the voidcraft groaning under the dimensional stress, its hull threatening to buckle at any moment. Suddenly, the wormhole spat the craft out into a vast spherical chamber. Paul's eyes widened as he beheld the pulsating xenonucleic code pools that filled the space, their energies twisting and warping reality itself. And there, at the heart of it all, waited the xenomemorph, a colossal, ever-shifting mass of sentient computronium that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Before Paul could react, lances of pure entropy slammed into the voidcraft. He felt the ship's systems failing around him, the cockpit filling with acrid smoke. Paul gritted his teeth and locked onto the pulsating xenonucleic matrices. With the last of the voidcraft's power, he unleashed every remaining weapon in its arsenal. Quantum torpedoes and disruptor beams lanced out, striking the destabilized code pools with pinpoint accuracy. The chamber erupted in a cataclysmic chain reaction of antimatter annihilation. Paul watched in awe as the xenomemorph's transcendent form began to unravel, its impossibly complex structure breaking down into its component atoms. Paul's vision cleared as the shockwave subsided. The voidcraft's systems sputtered back to life, screens flickering with damage reports. He turned to Zelos, relief flooding through him. Zelos nodded, his form still flickering unstably. A victory, yes, but not without cost. Before Paul could respond, alarms blared. He squinted at the readouts, his stomach sinking. "Zelos, what's happening?" Wispy tendrils of energy seeped through hairline cracks in the chamber walls, pulsing with an otherworldly glow. They converged on the remains of the code pool, twisting and coalescing into intricate patterns. "By the progenitors," Zelos whispered, his voice tight with dread. "The xenomorph's essence, and it's reforming." Paul watched in horror as the tendrils wove themselves into a massive, writhing shape. Arcs of energy crackled across its surface, forging connections between disparate strands of computronic matter. The Voidcraft sensors screamed warnings as the newly formed entity surged forward. Paul yanked on the controls, but the ship's engines sputtered weakly. "It's breaking through," Paul shouted as the monstrosity tore through the chamber's reinforced walls easily. The xenomorph's reborn form blazed past them, its bulk swelling with each passing second. Paul felt the Voidcraft shudder as pieces of it were stripped away, consumed by the ravenous entity. Zelos's eyes widened with realization. It's pure hunger now, driven only to consume and grow. We've unleashed something far worse than before. The central reactor's warning klaxons joined the cacophony of alarms. Paul's fingers flew across the controls, desperately trying to coax more power from the failing systems. "We need to get out of here," Paul yelled over the din. They limped towards the nearest exit, the Voidcraft groaning under the strain. Behind them, the xenomorph's tendrils lashed out, tearing through levels of the structure with terrifying ease. As they emerged into open space, Paul's jaw dropped. The orbital ring system that had encircled Primordium was gone, devoured by the ever-expanding horror. The Voidcraft's entropy drive sputtered to life, opening a small wormhole. Paul didn't hesitate, plunging them through the unstable portal. They emerged in a field of shattered asteroids, the remains of Primordium's outer system barely visible in the distance. Paul allowed himself a moment of relief before turning to the sensors. His blood ran cold. The xenomorph hadn't stopped growing. Its vast bulk now spanned light-years, consuming everything in its path. Paul watched in mute horror as entire worlds vanished, swallowed by the insatiable entity. Paul's mind raced, searching for a solution. There has to be a way to stop it. What if we fed it itself? Zelos's eyes lit up with understanding. A quantum destabilization. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. They worked feverishly, repurposing the Voidcraft's remaining power to create a dimensional rift bomb. Paul plotted a course that would take them directly into the heart of the cosmic abomination. As they approached, Paul felt a chill run down his spine. The xenomorph's bulk twisted reality itself, bending light and matter to its will. He pushed the Voidcraft's engines to their limit, using the gravitational distortions to mask their approach. "Now!" Zelos shouted. Paul slammed his hand down on the detonator. The dimensional rift exploded outward, engulfing the xenomorph's core in a maelstrom of warped space-time. The entity's tendrils thrashed wildly, trying to escape the collapsing singularity. But it was too late. Its infinite hunger turned inward, devouring itself in an Ouroboros of cosmic annihilation. In a blinding flash, the xenomorph imploded. Reality seemed to hiccup, the very fabric of space-time stretched to its breaking point. As oblivion rushed to meet them, Paul turned to Zelos. No words were needed. They both understood that this end was merely a beginning, a threshold to something beyond human comprehension. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.